Imagine returning home after a long workday, eager for the comfort of your personal sanctuary, only to find your meticulously maintained privacy hedges, 6 years of careful cultivation, butchered beyond recognition. Then, as if to mock your shock and dismay, you discover a bright yellow notice attached to your front door. A $750 fine for a vegetation violation you never committed. This was my reality one autumn afternoon in Willow Creek Gardens, a seemingly picturesque suburban community ruled with an iron fist by its homeowners association. President Karen Wilson. What Karen and her loyal board members didn't realize was that they had just declared war on the wrong homeowner, their newly hired financial auditor with full access to 5 years of suspicious records. They thought they were punishing a troublemaker. Instead, they handed me the keys to exposing their entire corrupt operation. Blood rushed to my face as I stared at the stumps of what used to be my beautiful privacy hedges. 6 years of care, destroyed in hours while I was at work. My body trembled with a mixture of shock and rage as I approached what remained jagged, uneven cuts where lush greenery had stood that morning, creating a stark, violated landscape across my front yard. My fingers trembled as I picked up the yellow paper stuck to my front door. Vegetation violation corrected. $750 landscaping fee applied to your account, Willow Creek HOA. The official stamp at the bottom made my stomach churn. The familiar logo of the HOA I'd lived under for 7 years, always careful to follow every rule to the letter. I rushed to my garage and grabbed my measuring tape, the metal case cold against my palm. Kneeling beside the massacred remains of my hedges, I extended the tape with a sharp metallic sound that seemed to emphasize the injustice. 3 feet tall. Exactly 3 feet tall now. The HOA rules clearly stated hedges could be up to 7 feet. I had memorized every bylaw when I purchased this. House mine had been 5 feet, a height I measured religiously every Saturday during my morning trimming routine. Through the new gaps in my once private yard, I caught movement across the street. Diane Reynolds, pretending to water her immaculate roses, was watching me with an unmistakable smirk. Her gaze met mine for a brief moment before she looked away, feigning innocence. Diane had complained about my hedges blocking her view at 3 consecutive neighborhood meetings. Each time I had calmly presented the HOA regulations, proving my compliance. Stormed inside, my keys jangling angrily as I tossed them onto the counter. My heart hammered against my ribs as I dialed the HOA office, each ring amplifying my fury. Willow Creek Gardens, HOA, this is Margaret speaking. Margaret, this is Jackson Taylor from 243 Magnolia Drive. I just got home to find my hedges butchered and a $750 fine on my door. I want to know who authorized this and why. I heard typing on a keyboard, then a pause. One moment, Mr. Taylor. More typing. Yes, we received several complaints about visibility issues with your hedges. The board voted on it last Thursday. Didn't you read the community email? What email? I snapped, pacing my living room. I never received any notice, and my hedges were within regulation height. I measure them weekly. Margaret's voice turned cold, bureaucratic. The board determined they exceeded height restrictions and blocked sight lines at the corner. The decision was unanimous. That's impossible, I countered, my voice rising. I want to speak to Karen Wilson. Right now. The board president is unavailable, Margaret replied with practiced detachment. You can file a formal appeal, but the landscaping fee stands. The work has already been done. I hung up and paced my living room, running my hands through my hair. This wasn't just unfair, it was illegal. They couldn't enter my property without proper notice. I grabbed my camera and went outside to document the damage. As I photographed the destroyed hedges, slowed in front of my house. Karen Wilson, HOA board president, rolled down her window. Her perfect blonde bob didn't move as she tilted her head, surveying the remains of my hedges with smug satisfaction. "Landscaping looks much better now, Jackson," she said with artificial sweetness. "The whole neighborhood thanks you for finally complying with regulations." "I was already in compliance, Karen," I responded, struggling to keep my voice steady. "You know that. This was trespassing and destruction of property." Karen's smile didn't reach her eyes. "The board has authority to remedy violations after proper notification. Check your email next time." As she started to roll up her window, something inside me snapped. "You targeted me specifically," I called out, "just like you did to the Montgomerys last month with their fence." Her window stopped halfway. "Be careful with accusations, Jackson," she warned, her voice dropping an octave. "This community runs on rules and respect. Some people just have trouble with both." The SUV pulled off my lawn. My phone buzzed with an email notification. I opened it, expecting another HOA dictate, but instead found a job confirmation for next Monday. My new position as the financial auditor for Willow Creek Gardens HOA. The board had just approved my hiring last week, but the paperwork wouldn't reach Karen until tomorrow. They had no idea I'd been given full access to their accounts, spending records, and decision logs for the past 5 years. I smiled for the first time since coming home. Karen Wilson thought she had all the power, but she had just handed me the keys to her kingdom. I walked back inside and opened my laptop, creating a fresh folder labeled HOA Audit Special Focus. That night, through my now exposed bedroom window, I noticed unusual activity at Karen's house. Board members arriving for an unscheduled meeting. Thomas Garcia, the only board member who ever voted against Karen, parked across the street. He looked troubled as he checked his watch and hurried inside. Grabbed my phone and set a reminder to speak with Thomas tomorrow. If Karen was calling emergency meetings, something bigger than my hedges was happening in Willow Creek Gardens. Dawn broke with the sound of my neighbor's lawnmower. Diane, starting yard work at 6 a.m. again, violating noise ordinances that Karen never enforced for her friends. I made coffee and reviewed the HOA bylaws, highlighting every rule about property access, notification requirements, and board voting procedures. By the time I finished, one thing was crystal clear. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new era in Willow Creek Gardens. The HOA had messed with the wrong homeowner. What they didn't know was that I had secret weapons they couldn't imagine: patience, attention to detail, and the accounting skills to follow every penny of their precious HOA fees. I arrived at the county records office the moment they opened, at 8 a.m. The clerk raised an eyebrow when I requested all property boundary maps and easement records for Willow Creek Gardens. "Doing some home improvements?" she asked, sliding the heavy binder across the counter. "More like solving a mystery," I replied, opening to my street section. "Someone cut down my hedges yesterday without permission. I need to know if they had any legal right to be on my land." The maps confirmed what I suspected. The HOA had 0 easement rights to my property, beyond the standard utility access points, which were nowhere near my hedges. What they did was straight up trespassing. While at the records office, I noticed something else. The landscaping company listed on my violation notice, Elite Green Solutions, had filed business registration paperwork just 3 months ago. The owner's name caught my eye: Michael Wilson, Karen's brother-in-law. I photographed everything with my phone and headed to my next stop, Diane Reynolds' house. Her car was in the driveway, and I knew she'd be home watching her morning shows. I knocked firmly. When Diane opened the door, her smile dropped, seeing, "There, Jackson, what a surprise." Her voice wavered slightly. "Good morning, Diane," I said pleasantly. "Those sprinklers are looking mighty active for a drought restriction day." I nodded toward her yard where sprinklers were indeed running, despite the county's odd, even water restrictions. "Just a quick sprinkle for the new flowers," she replied defensively, glancing nervously at her yard. "Funny how some violations get overlooked, while others get immediate action," I observed, "like my hedges that were cut yesterday. I wonder if you know anything about the complaints the HOA mentioned." Diane's face flushed. "Well, those hedges were blocking the view of the intersection safety hazard." "That's interesting since my property isn't on an intersection. It's mid-block, and the sightline maps I just checked at the county office show no visibility issues." She shifted uncomfortably. "Karen said," Diane bit her lip. "Karen said what?" "Diane, look," she finally admitted. "I mentioned at the garden club that your hedges made it hard for me to." Around the neighborhood, Karen said she'd take care of it, without any formal complaint process or notification to me. "That's against HOA bylaws. You should talk to Karen about that," Diane said, starting to close her door. "Oh, I will," I assured her. "By the way, when did they start waiving water restriction violations for garden club members?" Her door shut without another word. I spent the next 3 hours walking the neighborhood with my phone camera, documenting every single rule violation I could find. Karen's oversized gazebo that exceeded structure height, limitations, Rob Johnson's unpermitted fence staining the Bradford's commercial vehicles parked in their driveway overnight, all violations belonging to board members or their friends, all mysteriously overlooked. As I photographed Karen's non-regulation mailbox, a familiar black SUV pulled up beside me. "Taking up a new hobby, Jackson?" Karen's voice was honey-sweet, but her eyes were cold as ice. "Just admiring the neighborhood," I replied calmly. "Lots of inte." "Tend to find reasonable compromises," she said. "Those who cause trouble tend to face more scrutiny." "Is that a threat, Karen?" "Just an observation from 15 years running this community." She paused. "The board meeting is tonight. Feel free to file your complaint. We have a special form for chronic complainers." As she drove away, my phone buzzed with an email. It was from the HOA management company, confirming my start date for Monday and attaching preliminary account access credentials as requested by Thomas Garcia. Thomas was the only board member who consistently challenged Karen's decisions. I logged in immediately from my phone, curiosity burning. The system gave limited weekend access, but enough to see one crucial piece of information. Payments to landscaping vendors had tripled in the past year, with Elite Green Solutions receiving over $200,000 for emergency vegetation management. My hedge removal alone was billed at $1,500, with $750 passed to me and $750 paid from HOA funds. The sound of a car door close. Me look up. Thomas Garcia was walking toward me, looking nervously over his shoulder. "Jackson, we need to talk," he said quietly, "but not here. Meet me at Riverside Park in 20 minutes. Table near the duck pond." At the park, Thomas handed me a coffee and got straight to the point. "Karen is planning something big," he said, his voice low. "Yesterday's emergency meeting wasn't on the books. No minutes, no records." "About my hedges?" I asked. Thomas shook his head. "Your hedges were just the beginning. They're using beautification and safety to justify a massive neighborhood renovation project. Elite Green Solutions would get the entire contract." "How much?" I asked, already dreading the answer. $1.2 million, he replied grimly. I nearly choked on my coffee. "That's almost all our reserve funds." Thomas nodded. "The vote is happening at next week's meeting. They need to move fast because their last quarterly financial review had some questions about spending patterns." "Let me guess," I said. "The review where?" "They hired a new auditor," Exactly, Thomas confirmed. They don't know it's you yet. Karen just knows they needed someone with credentials to satisfy the bank's requirements for their loan application. I leaned back, mind racing. So they're going to spend all our reserves, then take out a loan, all funneled through Karen's brother-in-law's company. That's my guess, but I can't prove it. And I'm just one vote against 6. I showed him the photos I'd taken at the county office. You might not be able to prove it, Thomas, but starting Monday, I can access everything. Thomas's eyes widened. Be careful, Jackson. Last person who challenged Karen's authority found their job mysteriously at risk after she called their employer about community concerns. I'm not afraid of Karen, I said. You should be, Thomas replied, looking over my shoulder. She's watching us right now. I turned to see Karen's black SUV parked across the pond, her silhouette visible through the windshield. What would she do when she discovered who the new HOA auditor really was? Monday morning arrived with a knot in my stomach. I straightened my tie, grabbed my briefcase, filled with evidence about my Hedges, and drove to the HOA office. The glass doors slid open as I stepped into the air-conditioned building for the first time as an employee, not a frustrated resident. Margaret looked up from her computer, her usual stern expression melting into shock when I flashed my new security badge. Mr. Taylor, what are you doing here? Her fingers froze over her keyboard. Starting my new job, Margaret. I'm the financial auditor. Willow Creek HOA hired last month. I savored the way her mouth dropped open. But your complaint about the Hedges? I didn't realize. Funny how things work out, isn't it? Now, I'll need complete access to all financial records from the past 5 years. Let's start with landscaping expenditures, please. Margaret's hands trembled as she logged me into the system. Karen usually handles those files personally. Well, today I'll be handling them. That's what I was hired to do. For the next 4 hours, I dove into spreadsheets, invoices, and bank statements. What I found made my blood boil. Elite Green Solutions appeared in payment records dating back 3 years. Their rates outrageous. $1,200 per hedge when other companies charged $50. I dug deeper. Who owned Elite Green Solutions? A quick business registry search revealed Matthew Wilson as the owner. Wilson, Karen's last name. Could it be? I called a friend at the county clerk's office. Hey, Sammy, need a quick favor. Can you tell me if Matthew Wilson is related to Karen Wilson from Willow Creek? 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text. Matthew is married to Karen's sister. They share a vacation home in Palm Springs. My hands shook as I printed key documents. Karen had been funneling HOA money to her brother-in-law's company for years. Last year alone, they received $216,700 for emergency vegetation management across the community. But it got worse. I found a pattern in violation notices. Homes belonging to board members and their friends never received fines, while others faced immediate penalties for the smallest issues. My $750 fine wasn't unusual. Dozens of residents had similar charges, often for violations that didn't exist according to HOA rules. I created a map of the neighborhood, marking properties with violations and their connections to board members. The pattern was clear as day. Selective enforcement based on personal relationships. At 4:30 p.m., I heard Karen's voice in the hallway, quickly gathered my papers and slipped out the back door. I needed time to organize my findings before confronting her. Driving home, adrenaline pumping, I spotted Thomas Garcia walking his dog. I pulled over. Thomas? Got a minute? He approached cautiously. Jackson, heard you got hit with a hedge violation. Tough break. Did you know the HOA is paying triple the normal rate to Karen's brother-in-law's landscaping company? His eyes widened. What? How do you know that? I'm the… Today, he let out a low whistle. Karen never mentioned hiring you. Now it makes sense why she's been so nervous lately. Nervous how? Thomas glanced around and lowered his voice. She called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow night. The agenda just says personal restructuring, but she told me privately it was about protecting the HOA's financial integrity from internal threats. My heart raced. She was trying to fire me before I could report what I found. She's done it before to people who ask too many questions, Thomas added uncomfortably. Look, I joined the board to help make positive changes, but Karen runs it like her personal kingdom. Nothing happens without her approval. I handed him copies of the documents I'd printed. Take these home, look them over. If anything happens to me or my job, these need to reach every homeowner in Willow Creek. That evening, I organized my findings into a clear presentation. The doorbell rang just as I finished. Through the peephole, I saw Thomas. Standing there looking pale, Karen just sent a group text to board members. He said when I opened the door, "She claims you're abusing your position to pursue a personal vendetta over your Hedges. She's gathering votes to terminate your contract tomorrow." I invited him in and showed him my completed presentation. Let her try. I've documented everything. The nepotism, the inflated contracts, the selective enforcement. I even found evidence that she personally flagged my property for immediate action the day after I questioned her about rising HOA fees at last. Month's meeting. Thomas studied my dining room wall, now covered with evidence. "This is bigger than I thought. What's your plan?" "I'm going to that board meeting tomorrow night and I'm bringing everything I found. Karen thinks she's protecting herself, but she's actually given me the perfect audience." "She'll never let you speak," Thomas warned. "She controls the agenda with an iron fist." I pulled out the HOA bylaws, pointing to a highlighted section, article. "Any resident to present relevant financial information at public meetings. She can't stop me without breaking her own rules." Thomas smiled for the first time. "You really did your homework. When someone cuts down your hedges, you learn to dig up their roots." I handed him a flash drive backup copy, just in case. As Thomas left, he turned at the door. "Be careful, Jackson. Karen won't go down without a fight." "Good," I replied, "because neither will I." Rain poured down as I pulled into the packed community center parking lot the next evening. Every spot was taken, unusual for a Tuesday night HOA meeting that normally drew only a handful of residents. Word had clearly spread about tonight's emergency session. I grabbed my laptop bag and ran through the downpour, nearly colliding with Diane at the entrance. "You're not welcome here," she hissed, blocking the doorway. "This meeting is for discussing board matters." I held up the meeting notice. "This says all homeowners are invited to attend." Last I checked, I still own my home, even with shorter hedges. Inside the room hummed with whispered conversations that stopped when I entered. Residents filled every folding chair with more standing along the walls. Many nodded at me or gave small waves. Thomas sat at the board table, looking uncomfortable beside Karen, who was arranging papers with sharp, angry movements. I took the last empty seat in the front row and connected my laptop to the projector cable. Karen watched me with narrowed eyes. At exactly 7:00, she tapped the microphone, her diamond rings, catching the fluorescent light. "Welcome, everyone," she began with a painted-on smile. "Before we begin official business, I'd like to address a serious situation regarding our new financial auditor, Jackson Taylor." She pointed at me without looking my way. "Mr. Taylor has been making unfounded accusations and misusing his position to pursue a personal grudge after receiving a standard violation notice." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "The board will be voting. Contract immediately to protect our community's financial security." I stood up, projector remote in hand. Actually, Karen, I'd like to present my preliminary audit findings to the community directly. Karen's smile vanished. This isn't on the agenda, Mr. Taylor. Sit down or I'll have you removed. I held up the HOA bylaws booklet. Article 7, Section 3 states any resident may present relevant financial information at public meetings. And trust me, what I found is very relevant to everyone here. He's right, Thomas interjected. The bylaws allow this. Karen's fingers tightened around the microphone. Fine. 5 minutes, Mr. Taylor. Thank you. I pressed the remote and my first slide appeared, a photo of my butchered hedges. Many of you know what happened to my property last week. What you don't know is why. I clicked to the next slide, a screenshot of emails between Karen and Margaret. This is an email where Karen specifically ordered action against my property, despite compliance reports showing my hedges were within the 6ft height regulation. Karen lunged for the projector cord.
These are private communications. You have no right. Actually, as HOA auditor, I have every right to review all communications related to enforcement actions. I replied, blocking her from the equipment. And homeowners have the right to know when rules are being applied unfairly. The next slides showed a breakdown of landscaping expenses over 3 years. Elite Green Solutions has received over $500,000 from our HOA fees since 2021. Their rates are triple the market average. Can anyone guess who owns Elite Green Solutions?
This is slander, Karen shouted. It's public record, I replied calmly, showing business registration documents. Elite Green Solutions is owned by Matthew Wilson, Karen's brother-in-law. Every time they cut someone's shrubs or remove a tree, your HOA fees fund Karen's family. Gasps echoed through the room. An elderly man in the back stood up. They charged me $900 to trim one oak tree last spring. Said it was an emergency hazard removal. The $1,200 for that service, I confirmed. The going rate from other companies would be about $350. More residents began sharing similar stories. I let them talk for a minute before continuing, but it gets worse. I clicked to a neighborhood map with red and green dots marking houses. Green dots show properties belonging to board members and their friends. Red dots show everyone else. Notice anything about violation enforcement patterns? The contrast was stark. Clusters of green dots had no violations, while red dots were covered with multiple citations. I reviewed 3 years of violation records. If you're friends with board members, your violations magically disappear. If you've ever questioned the board like I did at last month's meeting about rising fees, you suddenly get hit with multiple violations. Karen's face had turned scarlet. These are baseless accusations. The board has always acted in the community's best interest. From the front row, Mrs. Jenkins, who rarely spoke at meetings, stood up shakily with her. Nothing fined me for my rose bushes being too tall, but Diane's illegal swimming pool addition never received a citation. Diane gasped, "My pool is fully approved." Mrs. Jenkins held up papers. "Not according to the county permit office." I checked. More residents started speaking up. They fined me $500 for parking my work van overnight once. They made me repaint my whole house because the shade of blue was too bright. I got cited for a basketball hoop that's been there for 5 years. I returned to my presentation. The most concerning finding is this. I displayed a graph showing the HOA reserve fund declining sharply. Our community's emergency reserves have shrunk by 40% in 2 years, with no major improvements to justify the expense. Karen tried to regain control. This meeting is adjourned. We will address these fabricated concerns at a later date, after proper review. Thomas stood up. Point of order. The meeting cannot be adjourned without a vote. He reached for the gavel. Karen was clutching. Motion to continue the meeting and vote for an independent forensic audit of all HOA finances for the past 5 years. Second, called voices from around the room. "This is ridiculous," Karen snapped. "All in favor?" Thomas asked. Hands shot up throughout the room. Nearly every resident was voting yes. "Motion passes," Thomas declared. "The board will arrange for an independent auditor, not Mr. Taylor, to avoid any conflict of interest, to conduct a complete forensic audit." Karen flung the gavel onto the table with a crack. "You'll regret this," she snarled at me as she gathered her designer purse. "All of you will regret this. I've given 15 years to this community." "No, Karen," I replied quietly. "You've taken from this community for 15 years. There's a difference." As she stormed toward the exit, she jabbed a manicured finger at my chest. "You've made a terrible mistake, Jackson. This is my neighborhood. I built it, and I can tear you down just as easily as those stupid Hedges." I watched. Her leave then turned back to find Thomas organizing residents into action committees. The elderly Mrs. Jenkins patted my arm. "Young man, I've lived here since before the HOA existed. What you did tonight took guts." I smiled at her. "Sometimes you have to stand your ground." "Well, you certainly did that." She pointed to Karen's abandoned gavel on the table. "And it looks like the balance of power just shifted." Little did I know Karen wasn't one to surrender power easily. Her next move would make cutting my hedges look like a friendly gesture. Loud banging on my front door jolted me. Awake at 6:15 a.m., I peered through the blinds to see a bulldozer rumbling in front of my house. Karen stood in my yard wearing a bright yellow safety vest, pointing and giving orders to a work crew. I rushed outside, still in my pajamas and slippers. "Stop right now. What's happening on my property?" Karen turned with a fake smile. "Good morning, Jackson. We're conducting an emergency pipe inspection. Our sensors detected a major water leak under your front yard that's wasting community resources." "That's impossible," I said, stepping between her and the nervous-looking workers. "I had my plumbing checked last month." "You can't just show up and start digging." Karen pulled a paper from her clipboard. "Actually, I can. This emergency work order gives us full access. CV signatures, all perfectly legal." I snatched the paper and examined it. The document looked official, but something felt wrong. "You need proper notice for this kind of work, not for emergencies," Karen said, grabbing the paper back. "Now please, step aside or I'll be forced to call the police for interfering with critical infrastructure repair." My neighbor, Mrs. Gonzalez, came out of her house, coffee in hand. "Jackson, everything okay?" Soon other neighbors appeared, curious about the commotion. I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling Thomas," Karen smirked. "Call whoever you want. This is happening." While my phone rang, the work crew. They weren't wearing the usual utility company uniforms, just generic work clothes, and their truck had a magnetic sign that looked freshly applied. Thomas arrived 10 minutes later, still buttoning his shirt. He studied the work order. "This authorization requires 3 board signatures," Thomas said. "I only see yours and Robert's. Who's the third?" Karen pointed to a scribble at the bottom. "Diane signed as acting secretary." "That's not how it works," Thomas said. "Diane isn't the secretary, and emergency votes require notifying all board members, including me." More neighbors gathered, whispering among themselves. I raised my voice so everyone could hear. "This is pure revenge for last night's meeting. Karen's trying to tear up my yard before the forensic accountants arrive tomorrow." Phones came out as people started recording. Karen's face reddened. "This is a legitimate emergency. The leak could damage the foundation of nearby homes." I crossed my arms. "Then, where's the water company? Where's the leak detect?" "I don't need to explain board decisions to you," Karen snapped, losing her cool. One of the workers approached Karen looking uncomfortable. "Ma'am, if this isn't properly authorized, we could lose our licenses." Karen whirled on him.
You're being paid to do a job, not ask questions. I stepped forward. Actually, I have questions too. Like, why is this crew from Johnson Brothers Excavation when our HOA contracts exclusively with city utilities for infrastructure? I pointed to their magnetic door sign. And why does your business license number not match any registered company? In this county, the crew looked at each other nervously. One whispered to the others, and they began packing up their marking flags. Where do you think you're going? Karen yelled. I'm paying you good money. The crew leader shook his head. Sorry, lady, we didn't sign up for this. You said this was all approved. Just then, 2 news vans turned onto our street, cameras already rolling. Thomas smiled at my surprised look. I called them last night after the meeting. Thought they might be interested in our HOA drama. Karen's face drained of color as she saw the reporters heading our way. She fumbled for her car keys. This isn't over, Jackson, she hissed. Nobody challenges me and gets away with it. You started this war when you cut down my hedges, I replied calmly. But I'm going to finish it. As Karen sped away in her SUV, a reporter approached with a microphone. Sir, we received a tip about possible HOA corruption in Willow Creek Gardens. Can you tell us what's happening here today? I looked directly into the camera. I'm about to show you how one woman turned our neighborhood into her personal kingdom and how we're taking it back. Breaking news in the Willow Creek Garden scandal. The TV announcer said as I turned up the volume. Former HOA president Karen Wilson has been arrested today on multiple charges of fraud and financial misconduct, following a 6-week investigation. My phone immediately buzzed with texts from neighbors. The news we'd all been waiting for had finally arrived. The day after the bulldozer incident, everything had snowballed faster than I could have imagined. The local news segment went viral when people saw footage of Karen trying to dig up my yard. Reporters started digging too, not into my lawn, but into the HOA's finances. I opened my front door to find Thomas standing there with a bottle of champagne. Did you see? They finally got her. I invited him in, and we watched as the reporter continued. According to court documents, Wilson and 3 other board members allegedly misappropriated over $400,000 in homeowner fees over a 5-year period through fake invoices, inflated contracts, and hidden kickbacks. The forensic accountants had found far more than I ever suspected. Karen had been running the neighborhood like her personal piggy bank for years. Every speed bump installation, every tree trimming service, every community event had hidden money flowing back to Karen and her friend. Can't believe how quickly everything fell apart for her, Thomas said, shaking his head. After the news vans showed up at your house that morning, Karen made her biggest mistake. Instead of lying low, she called an emergency board meeting that same afternoon and tried to fire you from your auditor position. But when she arrived, I added, the room was full of angry homeowners and 2 detectives from the county financial crimes unit. Thomas laughed. Remember how she tried to claim she was the victim, that we were all conspiring against her, and then Diane cracked and started cracking, crying, admitting everything right there in front of everyone. Diane had been the first to turn on Karen, offering to testify in exchange for leniency. Then Robert from the board had done the same. Within days, Karen's carefully built empire had crumbled. My doorbell rang again. This time, it was Mrs. Gonzalez with a homemade cake. I saw the news. We're celebrating tonight. Soon my living room filled with neighbors bringing food and drinks. It had become a tradition over the past weeks, gathering at different houses to share updates as the investigation unfolded. Have you seen what they found at Elite Green Solutions? Asked Mr. Jenkins, our retired postal worker. They were charging us triple for half the work. My brother's a landscaper, and he nearly fell over when I showed him our invoices. The landscaping company, owned by Karen's brother-in-law, had been the biggest scheme. They'd been billing for work never done,
using cheap chemicals that damaged plants and cutting corners everywhere while charging premium prices. "Did you hear about Diane's house?" Mrs. Gonzalez whispered. "It's going up for sale next week. She can't afford to stay after paying back what she took." I nodded. I feel bad for her kids, but she made her choices. The temporary board, now led by Thomas, had been working around the clock to rebuild our community's finances and trust. "Jackson, tell everyone your good news," Thomas called out, raising his glass for attention. All eyes turned to me. "I got a call from the county commissioner yesterday." I said, "They're forming a special task force to investigate HOA fraud across the county. They've asked me to join as a citizen advisor to help draft new regulations." The room erupted in cheers and applause. "That's not all," I continued once the noise died down. "Remember those 750 hedge cutting fees Karen charged people over the years? The board voted yesterday to refund every penny plus interest." More cheers filled the room. Later, as people began heading home, Thomas and I stepped outside. The street looked different somehow, more like a real neighborhood than a collection of houses. People waved to each other and stopped to chat. Kids played in front yards that had previously been off-limits due to Karen's strict rules. "Look," Thomas said, pointing to my front yard. Tiny green shoots were pushing up where my hedges had once stood. "I planted new ones last weekend," I said. "They'll take years to grow back, but they will grow back," Thomas replied, "and we'll be here to see it." My phone buzzed with a news alert. I opened it and showed Thomas the screen. The county prosecutor had just announced they were expanding the investigation to 3 other HOAs where Karen had served as a consultant. "How many other neighborhoods has she damaged?" Thomas wondered. "Too many," I said, "but not anymore." As the sun set over Willow Creek Gardens, I felt something I hadn't experienced since moving here: pride in my community. We'd faced a bully together and won. We'd rebuilt what was broken. Car slowed as it passed my house. The driver rolled down the window, a woman I didn't recognize. "Excuse me," she called out. "I'm looking at a house for sale on Maple Street. Is this a good neighborhood to live in?" Thomas and I exchanged glances and smiled. "It is now," I answered. "It really is. Who would have thought that my destroyed hedges would lead to saving an entire community?" This story reveals a powerful truth. Injustice thrives when good people remain silent. What began as a simple act of retaliation, cutting down privacy hedges, eventually exposed a system of corruption that had been operating in plain sight for years. The lesson isn't just about standing up to bullies. It's about recognizing that one person with determination and evidence can create meaningful change in a community. Jackson's journey reminds us that apathy is the ally of corruption. For years, residents of Willow Creek Gardens had individually suffered under Karen's selective enforcement, but it wasn't until they united and shared their experiences that the pattern became undeniable. The true measure of a community isn't found in its pristine lawns or uniform aesthetic, but in how it treats its most vulnerable members and how it responds when confronted with its own failures. Willow Creek Gardens wasn't saved by bylaws or bureaucracy. It was saved by neighbors who rediscovered, pushing through the soil where Jackson's hedges once stood. A community's resilience lies in its ability to regrow and rebuild after damage, stronger, more vibrant, and more united than before. Have you ever encountered someone abusing their position of power in your community? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone currently facing a similar situation. If this video made you think about your own neighborhood or HOA, hit that like button to help more people discover this important message about standing up against corruption and protecting community values. For those dealing with unjust HOA practices, Remember to document everything. Know your rights and build alliances with like-minded neighbors. Together, you have more power than you realize. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of everyday people taking extraordinary stands against injustice. Turn on notifications so you never miss our weekly uploads of empowering content that someone who needs to hear that standing up for what's right isn't just possible, it's necessary. Sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to speak truth to power.